What's up guys, it's Z here, welcome back. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about the ban list because last time Konami made a ban list, they pretty much changed absolutely nothing. The format stayed completely the same, and now we are in desperate need of some change. Unfortunately, the OCG has shown us that even though Ishizu tier elements, even though they got hit really hard in their ban list, they're still the top reigning deck, and even though this might be the case here as well, at least we can lower their power scaling so other decks can have even a chance at competing. Because right now, even that is not possible in the format we are currently in. So at least even though the deck might not be enough to remove from the game completely, let's give the other decks somewhat of a fighting chance. So in this video, we're going to discuss what kind of changes we need to see moving forward. If you have any other opinions about what other cards need to get hit or cards that could come back from the ban list, comment them down below. And now, before we begin, if you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content. And now, let's get to the video. So let's start with the ban section. First of all, we have a card that is so powerful that you can do so much with just a single card, and the card I'm talking about is Tier Element Kit Kalos. This card is by far the most broken card tier elements have, because even if you just bring it out with instant fusion, you basically instant win the game. It's a level 5 monster that does so much for the deck. It searches or foolishes a card, it specials a monster on the field, and it mills 5 cards on top of this. I mean, everything about this card screams unfair, and it has to get banned immediately. This card gives so much advantage for the deck, it's not even funny. And I mentioned instant fusion, and yes, this card, if you summon it with instant fusion, then you basically win immediately, because with just one spell card, you're going to get pretty much everything you need for your entire combo. So yeah, Kit Kalos absolutely has to go, and sadly, even if this happens, we know that the deck can still do a lot of stuff, but we need to start somewhere, because the last time Konami did not do anything about the deck, and the hit to Herald of Orange Light was pretty much insignificant. Some people were not even playing the card, so we need to hit actual tier element cards and actually Shizu cards in order to make the deck less powerful. Now, there is one more card in the banned section that we need to talk about, and the thing is, if we hit a Shizu tier element and only that deck, there are some other decks lurking in the shadows ready to take over the format, so we need to address them as well, just to make sure that we don't end up in another format that just one deck has all the power, and that card is Barrier Statue of the Stormwinds. I feel like Konami just sometimes makes an archetype without even considering the possibilities of what could happen because of older cards, and this is definitely one of the most extreme scenarios, because there are so many good Wind Beast monsters Flunderies have been able to use. For example, Mega Raiza. Why is that card a Winged Beast? That makes no sense, but this card is the bread and butter of the Infernus of the deck. If we take the Barrier Statue away from Flunderies, we don't take away anything from its strategy, anything from its consistency. The deck can still function really well. We just take away the lock part that makes it so your opponent cannot play at all. We have cards like Harpy's Featherstorm that can be really unfair, but you have to hard draw these cards in order to use them. Barrier Statue is very easily searchable, and with the extra normal summons the deck has, you can summon this during your own turn, you can summon this during your opponent's turn when they do pretty much anything. So yeah, Barrier Statue is a card that has to go in order to make Flunderies a little bit more of a fair deck. They can still do whatever they want, they can still use all their normal summons, bouncing your own cards during your own turn, making M-Pen on their own turn to make sure they have somewhat of a floodgate on the field, but Barrier Statue is just the cherry on top that makes everything more unfair, so it's a card that absolutely has to. Now, moving on to the limited section, and oh boy, do we have a lot to talk about on this one. There are so many ways you can hit Ishizu tier elements that can make the deck weaker, but there are a couple cards that are just much better than others. So the first card is their field spell, Perlarino. Now, again, I mentioned Kit Kalos having too many effects and too many good uses in a deck. This field spell pretty much is the same thing. We have not strayed away from the broken field spell trend that has been polluting Yu-Gi-Oh for quite a few years now, but yeah, this card is another one of those examples, and what the deck can do with this card is amazing. So this card not only searches you the piece that you're missing, it can also be used as removal during your own turn and during your opponent's turn when you fuse, because with Havnish you can very easily fuse during your opponent's turn to put cards back to the bottom of the deck to trigger the field spell to pop a card, and on top of that it boosts your monsters, because why not? So yeah, this card gives a lot to the deck. It's a card that absolutely has to go to 1, because you need to be able to see this card in order to do a lot of the cards decks, because the deck does not need to play any kind of removal in the deck, especially now that Mystic Mine is gone. The deck was forced to play some cards to have outs to Mystic Mine before, but now that Mystic Mine is no longer in the game, the deck, all the removal it needs is in a card that is being played anyway as an engine piece. So yeah, Perlarino is a card that does too much for the deck, and putting it at 1 would make the deck less consistent and less powerful and having less outs to a lot of stuff. The next card we have at 1 is Tier Element Shireen, and Shireen is the extender of the deck. You can consider this card either being the one to get hit hit, or you can maybe argue for Havnis, you can argue for Rhinoheart. Any one of these three going to 1 would do the same. Maybe you can argue that more than one of these cards have to go to 1, like in the OCG where they limited both Shireen and Rhinoheart and they put Havnis to 2. But I just feel like it's still a little bit early for the TCG to go all out for Ishizu tier elements. So I feel like they're still going to leave some room for further hits in the future. So we just have Shireen here as the limited monster for the archetype, and it's a good one because this card can trigger the Ishizu cards because it discards a card when you summon it. It's the extender, so it makes it so if your Rhinoheart gets hit with a Veiler, an Ash, or anything like that, you do have extenders so you can play. So by putting this card to 1 and putting Perla Rhino to 1 so you cannot search it as consistently 2, your opponent can sometimes stop you with hand drops, because one of the big issues with the deck right now is that 1 hand drop is basically never enough, and sometimes even 2 hand drops are not enough to stop this deck. So by putting cards to 1, you make it so that hand drops can be more effective against a deck like this, and also you hit its consistency. Now let's move into the Ishizu cards, because these cards have pretty much basically been Ishizu cards that are tier element cards in disguise. I mean, nobody's playing these cards as their own archetype, which they were intended to play as kind of a deck out archetype for Ishizu Exchange of the Spirit type of deck, but we're seeing these cards in basically tier elements and maybe sometimes in Anchuria, but yeah, these cards are tier element cards if anything else. So we need to address these cards as well because they are the ones that pushed the tier element deck on top of everything. The deck was already really good and arguably still the best deck even before these cards came out, but when these cards came out, they basically made the deck absolute tier 0 status. So let's talk about them. The first one is Keldo to 1, the Possessed Statue. Now Keldo is better than Mudora because Mudora needs you to play the card, the trap card that they got, the Gravekeeper's Trap, in order to do something extra other than just being an extender that discards you an Earth Fairy from your hand. So most people don't play that card because it's extra bricks that the deck doesn't really need to compete with anything. So putting Keldo to 1 means that your enablers are not going to be that powerful because Keldo, while doing the same thing as Mudora, it also searches you a card that mentions Exchange of the Spirit, so you can search one of the Millets or you can search any other card. So it's a really good hit because Mudora is a card that it's just an extender that discards. This card does search as well, so it's more unfair, so this card does go to 1, just like in the OCG. However, unlike the OCG, we need to address another card because the OCG hit Ajido to 1, which was kinda not worth, because Ajido was a card that people were already playing at 1. So putting it at 1 makes no sense. It doesn't change anything. So the card that we do really need to put at 1 is Kelbeck the Ancient Vanguard. Kelbeck is a card that, similar to Ajido, they both mill 5 from both decks. If you're playing Exchange of the Spirit, they can mill 10 from one of those decks, but people don't really do that. But the thing is, Ajido is a card that can special summon itself, but it doesn't do anything else. This card is a hand trap on top of everything. This card, you can special summon it and bounce a card as well. So yeah, this card does so much, similar to every other card that I talked about already. When a card does more than 2 things for a deck, then it's basically unfair, especially when the deck is that good. So this card, it mills 5 cards, it can be used as disruption, and it's a level 4 body to go for cards like Abyss Dweller, which we all know how powerful it is right now because of the current deck that relies so much on the graveyard. So yeah, instead of putting Ajido to 1, which if they follow the OCG and do that, they're not going to pretty much change anything because nobody's playing more than 1 Ajido, at least in 90% of the decks that we see out there that do well. So yeah, Kelbeck is a card that needs to go to 1, and this would force to play more copies of Ajido because if you want to have consistent millers, you cannot play 1 Ajido and 1 Kelbeck, you are never going to see them, so you would have to play more copies of Ajido, which is a card that people opt to not play right now because it's not that great compared to Kelbeck. So yeah, putting Kelbeck to 1 would make a lot more sense than hitting Ajido like in the OCG, and I hope Konami doesn't follow them because they are going to miss 1 completely slot in the ban list. Now, moving away from Ishizu tier elements, let's hit some other stuff that need to be addressed, mainly because of how popular they are or how popular they could be in case tier elements would just completely scrape off the face of the earth. So the first card is Sprite Starter. So Sprite Starter is a card that does pretty much emergency teleport type of things for Sprite, and even though Sprite right now, it's not the greatest deck, it's still a really good deck though, because even though we are in a tier 0 format, this is probably the second best deck, and they're playing it mostly with Runics, which make it more unfair because of all the cards you can use and all the draw power. But Starter is basically the strongest card Sprite has right now because you can special summon anything from the deck, and you can even use this during your opponent's turn because it's a quick play to get a disruption on the board. So yeah, it's a really good card and it needs to go to 1. Maybe the deck will require even more hits down the road, but for now, the deck doesn't do enough to hit it further. But if it does become the best deck sooner or later, because it's going to be once Ishizu tier elements get taken down to the ground, then we might need to address this deck a little bit more, but for now I feel like just putting this card to 1 is basically fine. Now there are 2 more cards in the limited section that we need to talk about, and they're kind of like more generic hits, but they do feel like they are meant to counter the best decks, but end up helping them more. So the first card is Bestial Magnamut. Now, the Bestial engine, it's being played in absolutely everything. Ishizu Tear Laments are partially one of the reasons that this is the case, because you need disruption in the graveyard in order to be able to deal with the deck, so having DD Crows that can act as bodies that do extra stuff, yeah, that pretty much seals the deal for a card that sees a lot of play. But the thing is, Magnamut is a card that again does so much for one card. Not only is it a DD Crow you can use during your own turn or during your opponent's turn, it's a level 6 body on the field you can use to make cards like Wallow, which is an amazing monster, and it searches you during the end phase, because again, why not? So yeah, Bestial Magnamut, if it goes to 1, people are definitely will keep going to playing the engine in their decks no matter what, because you can still use 7 Bestials even if one of them goes to 1, so you're going to use them mainly for their graveyard disruption effect and bodies on the field, but searching a dragon again during the end phase, this just does too much for a lot of decks, and we all know that Dragon Link is one of those decks that always lays dormant in a lot of formats, but once the ban list deals with the main problems, this deck is always there ready to take the cake, so this card is going to help them take it even faster if it's still at 3 when this time arrives. So yeah, it's a card that in specific decks is much more powerful, but it's a card that you're going to see in pretty much everything right now, just because of how good the card is. And the last card that we have in the limited section, this is the last hit on the ban list, because in the semi-limited we are not hitting anything, we're pretty much giving cards back to archetypes, and the last limited card is Castira Fenrir. Now, it's another card that's similar to Magnamut you're going to see in pretty much a lot of decks. Castira right now is not doing a lot as an archetype because we still don't have Photon Hypernova, and if we get that set and Fenrir is still at 3, we are going to see something similar to Ishizu Tear Laments, maybe even stronger, and especially if Ishizu Tear Laments get hit, then maybe we are going to see a new Tier 0 deck arise right after another Tier 0 format. So I doubt Konami wants that to happen, and we've seen from the OCG that Castira is an amazing archetype, very, very powerful, and this card does not only see play as an engine in pretty much a lot of things right now, but can also make an archetype so powerful. So Fenrir, it's a card that, similarly to Pancratops and maybe even way stronger than Pancratops, deserves to be at 1. It's a free special, it's disruption, it searches. Yeah, I don't feel like I need to explain the same thing again. When a card does so much and it's being played a lot in top tier decks, then it absolutely has to get hit, otherwise things can spiral out of control for a very long time. So Konami has to address these issues now, otherwise the format is going to keep being stale for a very long time. Now let's stray away from the hits a little bit and talk about some cards that can potentially come off the list. So moving on to the semi-limited section, I believe that all 3 cards we have right here can go to 3 right away, but we all know Konami, if they put a card to 1, they need to put it at 2 first to test the waters, and then they're going to put it at 3. So first we have Spellbook of Judgment. Spellbook of Judgment came back after a decade, and we've seen that this card has actually been power crept. It's crazy to say of such a powerhouse card like this one, but it's the truth. This card did not do anything at 1, and I'm pretty much sure that it wouldn't do anything at 3 either, but of course we have to put it at 2 first because Konami. So yeah, this card used to be a menace because of Juggernaut the Spiritualist, but the thing is now, after a decade, we have so many outs to cards like Jaugen that it doesn't even do anything. We have cards like Imperm, Dark Ruler No More, Forbidden Droplet. We have so many things to deal with a little monster that prevents us from special summoning. So yeah, and this card needs setup. It's a card that when you activate it, it does absolutely nothing. You have to do more stuff after you activate it in order to get full value of it, and you're searching during the end phase, so the cards you're searching are not going to be any of use to you during your opponent's turn. You cannot, for example, search a Spellbook of Fate and use it as disruption during your opponent's turn. Unfortunately, no, because you cannot set it when you search it during the end phase. So yeah, the type of card the Spellbook of Judgment used to be is no longer the thing. It's still a very powerful card for spellbooks, but it's not a card that can fit very, very well in the format that we have a decade later. So yeah, this card can easily come back to N3 afterwards to give spellbook decks at least somewhat of a fighting chance and have something to do, mainly as a win condition because they really lack that right. The next card is Multi-Roll. Sky Strikers. It's a deck that we've seen that it can do a lot, but the thing is, Engage is a card that as long as it stays at 1, the deck is pretty much fine because Engage was never hit as a Sky Striker card. It was hit as a card that was being played in Orcust in the last thing it was played before it got banned. So yeah, Multi-Roll is a card that is not going to see any type of generic use. It's going to be just in Sky Strikers. It's going to make them a little bit more powerful, and yeah, we need to give them some more support because Konami feels like the Sky Strikers are basically the new age Dark Magician girl. That's basically what Rei is, with all the support is getting in the OCG, and even she's getting a manga of all things. So yeah, I'm pretty sure TCG is going to follow the trend, and especially when all these cards we're waiting to get released, they're going to give us back the cards that are fine, which are basically not Hornet Drones and Engage. Anything else can be at 3 very, very easily, and multi-roll is the last card there. And the last card in the semi-limited list is Infernity Archfiend. I've been saying this for quite a while, and I'm kind of getting bored of it, to be honest. If Archfiend does not go to 2 or 3 in the next ban list, I might stop including it in my Banlist predictions altogether, because I feel like this has just become a meme at this point. This card, in the OCG, is a 3, it does nothing, and here it would not change anything. Infernity is a deck that basically used to be the terror of combo decks, but now we have so many ways to do combos that are way more consistent and even way more powerful than Infernity combos. So yeah, Infernities, if they get Archfiend back, nothing would happen. Launcher, that would be a different case, maybe. I'm not completely sure about that. I haven't tested the deck with 3 launchers for a very, very long time, ever since the card was a 3. But we all know, and we all can agree, that Archfiend being at 3 would pretty much do nothing. It would basically mean that you would not have to play the Brick Ares in the deck to search Archfiend, because you would have more copies, so you would see them more consistently. So yeah, I'm pretty much mentioning this for the last time here. If it doesn't happen again, then I'm convinced that it's never going to happen, so we might as well move forward. And for the unlimited section, we have the cards that are currently R2, other than Destiny Hero Malicious, because Malicious is the only card that deserves to be semi-limited, because it just makes sense for its design to be at 2. Everything else being at 2 makes no sense. It doesn't pretty much change anything from being to 3, so you might as well put them to 3. So the first card is Recital Starling. They gave us a second copy back in the previous ban list, and again, Lyrlusk is a deck that used to be a terror, but not anymore. Especially with banning of Simurgh, then the deck lost a lot of power, so it's not like more copies of Recital Starling make the deck better. Yes, it's not a hard once per turn, and you can use it for your top Draco Future, but again, these types of combos anymore, they don't really do. Most people would try like crazy FTKs with Ghost Archangel of Mischief and other stuff, or Ptolemaios with more copies of Recital Starling, but you can do them even with 2, and nobody's playing them competitively, obviously, because these kinds of combos are so frail, so putting this card back to 3 would not change a thing. And the last card is Pot of Desires. Pot of Desires has no business being at less than 3 copies when Pot of Prosperity is at 3. Let's just make this clear. Pot of Prosperity is a much, much better card than Pot of Desires. You choose what you banish, so you can just banish 3 cards from your extra deck and nothing changes. If you want to go all out, you can banish 6, with some decks want to banish 6 cards because they don't care about their extra deck at all, and you get to pick exactly which card you want. While Desires, you may banish some really good cards that you need down the road for the game. You might draw cards you already have, cards you already need, or for the meme's sake, multiple copies of Pot of Desires by drawing with Desires, so that can happen as well. But you are never going to pick a Pot of Prosperity with Pot of Prosperity unless your excavations are completely random and you don't want any of the other cards. So yeah, Pot of Desires being at 2 doesn't make sense when the card like this exists, so please put this card back to 3, because I know there are a lot of budget players out there that do not really want to invest in Pot of Prosperity, and they would gladly play Desires over it, even though it's more risky and it's not that good. But yeah, this card being at 2, some people already would play 2 even this card was at 3, because they were afraid of drawing Desires with Desires, so they would play 2 willingly. So sometimes even putting this card back to 3 would not even change some people playing 2, but the correct thing now is to play 3 copies just because of how powerful the card is, so at least give us the option to do so. So yep, that's the video, guys. Again, if you think that I've missed anything, if you have any other opinions of cards that could get hit or should get hit, or other cards that you would feel like they would be fine of coming back at this point, comment down below. Let's have a discussion and try to fix the format, because we absolutely need Konami to do something in this next list. Otherwise, players are going to get even more bored than they are right now with the format, and nobody wants that, not even Konami. So yep, that's the video, guys. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.